Well, hello, hello. I'm a little early because I am just wanting to try out the technology and making sure that it's all going all right. Seems to be live. Hi there. Who have I got with me? I wonder. Technology is a really weird thing. I hadn't realized that Facebook had changed some things. And so doing these sorts of webinars and online Facebook Live things are a little bit tricky because I've got to use some new technology. So because I'm trying this out, I'd love for you to shout me a like or send me a comment so that I know that this is actually working. Hey, Naomi. Thumbs up. Can you hear me, Naomi? Is it working on your side? This is like totally new technology for me. And so I'm trying to figure out if you can actually see and hear me. Naomi, can you see me okay? Can you hear me all right? So sharing is paused. That can't be right. Okay. I shall go to my phone and just make sure that it's okay. It's a little bit like when you go to the movies and you have to watch the ads. I'm afraid we're going to have to do a little bit of that. It's not quite start time anyway. It's I've got 1 minute before we actually go live. Okay, I can see it on my phone. So I'm going to assume that it is working. Yes, really clear. Can see me well. Fantastic. Hooray. I had to use Zoom to do this, Naomi. Okay, I'm going to have my phone with me so that I can make sure that it's all going well. It's on my phone as well. So I'm going to. Okay, brilliant. So welcome to the Legacy League. What have you been up to, Naomi, today? Tell me what you've been up to, and would love to know what your family structure is, I suppose. I think I already know, but it might be nice just to throw it out there. Who do you have in your family, and what are some of your top interests, I suppose, in a topic like this? Let me know. So the first thing I want to say is I am a clinical psychologist. However, you will find that when I'm in the burnout space, I'm not coming really from therapy. I'm not really coming from that sort of individual space where I am a therapist. I'm really sitting more in a coaching space, which is really making some broad strokes in terms of what we know about burnout. What are the key things that happen in the burnout space? How do we apply it from a problem solving point of view in other spaces such as today parenting? So what I attempt to do basically is to bring to you what's the best knowledge we have in burnout and how can we actually apply it in parenting. Big clinical day today, Naomi. Well, I'm glad that you took the time to do this. I hope you're in pajamas, wearing some big fluffy slippers with a cuppa doing this together. Hey, Kathy. Hello. You didn't hear much from me today because, as you know, I've had several online things as well. 4 kids, Naomi? 19? No way. You can't have a 19-year-old. 19, 16, 13, and 12? Oh, eldest moved out. Wow. How are you feeling about that? Oh, I can't imagine mine moving out just yet. So I have a 16-year-old and I have a 14-year-old. So we are well and truly in the teenage years. So really what I want to bring to you today, I have to go back to my Zoom, I think. Where is my Zoom? How am I going to actually share this? Just bear with me. Doing this via Zoom is a bit tricky for me. Oh gosh. I just had, oh, okay, great. Now, hopefully, if I do this, things change. All right, I'll keep talking anyway. So, why do I care so much about this burnout stuff? And why am I actually talking to parents now about this burnout stuff? It really struck me when I realized that burnout is becoming such a prevalent term, right? We hear it everywhere. And that there's also now some new emerging research on parental burnout, right? Which basically is extreme exhaustion and fatigue. So, if you actually think about burnout as the relationship between an individual and their work, or the thing that, vocationally they do the most, well, it seems like parenting is becoming one of those domains where our caring for our children is really like a job, right? A full-time job or a vocation, because we have the job of nurturing and growing human beings who will become adults. And so the act of doing that in that role seems to be leading to high levels of exhaustion, high levels of disconnection. So parents feeling like, because they're so exhausted, that they can't connect really well with their children, and so wanting to avoid and stay away from their children, and feeling like they're just not being able to achieve or accomplish, do their job, feeling guilty, that sort of stuff. Now, the concern really there is, if we have parents who are feeling exhausted and not feeling like they can actually connect with their children, well, that's going to be some bad news for the future generations, because how adults and individuals learn to connect and care with one another comes from the relationships that we have. And so when we have parents who are exhausted, who are guilty, who are feeling extreme guilt, and the only way they can deal with it is to avoid it, that's just going to lead to children who will learn the same thing. So why do I care? What's this legacy thing I keep talking about? Basically, for me, it's, I don't really want my children to live with that picture. I don't really want them to live with that sense that there isn't any hope. And so I want to pay it forward. I want to be able to network and connect with other parents so that we can pay it forward to our kids and say, it was tough being a parent. It was tough living in this modern age. Um, it's possible for you to keep going, because we figured out ways that we can keep going. So for me personally, I really am in this space as a parent because of my own values. They're the values that also are part of the private practice that I own. One is to be generous. For us to come together and be generous with our knowledge, with our tips, with our care, with our encouragement and support of one another, to really respect that parents are doing the best that they can, and to respect that children are doing the best that they can. I want to basically also impart a value of compassion, that we don't judge one another, we're gracious with one another, because who tells us how to do this stuff anyway? And I do it because basically one of my values is commitment. We don't give up, right? We don't give up. We keep trying to figure out, how do we actually push back against this space of burnout? So why do I care? So I've really just put this this short talk, and please send me your questions and comments to make it, contextualize it, or for any practical stuff, into 3 sections. One is confidence, parenting with confidence, parenting with conviction, and then parenting with connection. In any burnout space that you work in, you will come back to the need to actually figure out your why. Without knowing why you're doing this parenting thing, you will resent it, right? Okay, so parenting with confidence. For me, this really means, first of all, knowing who you are, first of all. Okay. A lot of times in the parenting space, tell me what you think about this. We get really bogged down, and also we get really judgy about things in the how. How do we do this parenting thing? How do we pack school lunch boxes? How do we select subjects? How do we select a school for our children? How do we choose toys? How do we get really bogged down in the how, right? And then when we get bogged down in the how, we look across the table and we go like, oh man, they're doing it differently. Have I got it wrong? Right? Or we start to listen to what other people are saying we should be doing and think, oh, I'm just going to do it that way. So parenting with confidence, I always say that we are the best parents for our children. We are the right parent for our children, right? In other words, they're with us. They're not stuck with us, but they're ours, okay? They got your DNA. They got like your stuff. They've watched you. They've grown up with you. So you are the best parent. And so therefore, you need to know who that best parent is. What are your strengths? You parent authentically from those strengths. My strength, I've come to realize, is that I problem solve really well, and I seem to be able to communicate things quite well. When I think of my strengths, these would be the two things that I think are my personal strength. It might be helpful to know your love language. How do you give love? How do you receive love? You know, I used to think that I wasn't such a great mom because I'm not so great with the craft things. Oh my gosh, Play-Doh, the years of Play-Doh, so glad that they're over. Because I would, honestly, I'd just be really bored, right? Sitting there with Play-Doh. It's just not my thing. What's your love language? For me, funnily enough, it's touch. And also quality time, touch and quality time. So I love communicating love and receiving love by physical activities. Now, my kids would probably want to strangle me if I hugged and kissed them every day, all the time. Now, when they're 16 and 14, so I've had to figure that out. But for me, that just means, you know, sometimes I'll fiddle with a ponytail. Sometimes it's a touch on the shoulder. These days, it's about, you know, fist bumps, high fives. That for me is my way of communicating love. And I also then need to communicate it with them. I've got to say to them, you know, this is my love language. This is what I need, and this is how you will know when I'm expressing love for you. So part of it is knowing our love language, and I guess being comfortable with that, right? I've been comfortable with how you receive and express love. It's really helpful for us to actually know our needs. Hey, Patricia, how are you going? What are you wearing today? And I don't mean that in a naughty way, because you have a fabulous wardrobe. What are our needs? You know, what are our top drivers? For me, freedom, competence, and productivity are really, really important for me. Now, this is a need, okay? It's not what I impose on others. One of the things that I've discovered very early on in being a parent is that I actually wanted to impose these needs on other people. I wanted my children to give me freedom. I wanted them to be productive, and I wanted them to be competent. And I'd get really frustrated at homework time, for example, or when I just wanted to read a book and they wanted me to do all this other stuff, right? What I mean is, you got to know what your needs are so that you can figure out how to fill your tank with those needs, not just in your time with the children, but also outside of that. So remember, you can send me questions and comments. I am actually looking at them as I go along. So for me, what does it mean for freedom? Well, very often I actually need to do silly things. Once I even had Mother's Day without any children or family. That was quite fun and interesting. Once I did that. It means that I value a spontaneous lifestyle, right? I'm not really good with meal planning and actually knowing tomorrow what we will eat, what we will do, right? What are your values? Now, one of the best ways I've experienced someone trying to help me to figure out what our values, what's important to you, is to actually have to ask the question, what totally annoys you? What totally really cheeses you off in the hole? What's that? I'd love to know what that is for you. Can you send me some stuff? Because it helps me to know that I'm normal as well. What totally cheeses you off? You know, for my husband, he really, really does not like seeing dirty dishes in the sink. Did not know that. Married to him for so many years, had no idea. Now, because one of my values is sustainable living. I don't like to do the dishes until the very end, but so that cheeses him off. What cheeses me off probably is when everybody is doing something, being productive, right? And one person goes and watches TV, or we're all putting away the dishes and wiping down the table, and one person sits down and reads a book. That really, really annoys me. And it probably speaks to my value of commitment, right? For me, it's really important that we do things, we do it together, we finish it together, and we commit to the task, and then everybody can basically power down and walk away. So what are your values? It's important that we know who we are so that we can also ask the question of, and who are these kids that we have? What are their strengths? What are their love languages? What are their needs? What do they value? Being able to think about who we are and inviting conversation for who our kids are is a really great way to get confidence to see that it's not really about how you do things or what you do things. It's actually who you're doing it with, right? I remember once when I was really stressed out about lunch boxes. Kids were really, really young at that point in time. And I'm just not good with this sort of stuff, right? If honest to goodness, I just open the fridge, I look at what's there, I kind of do a bit of an audit, what I feel like, there, hey presto, that's lunch. You can't do that with lunch boxes. And finally, I really had to think about it and thought, this is not my strength, right? But one of my children has a strength actually in forward planning, and they're really, really in tune somehow with just knowing what everybody likes. I don't know how they do this, but they just do. Okay, they're the best person to consult for Christmas presents, because I like just go what's cheap and on sale and make sure it's just not another handbag that I buy for someone. And asked this child and said, what would you put into the fridge for lunches if we had to? And it blew my mind what this child of mine said. Never knew, never thought of doing that. So it respects, we can parent with confidence when we know who we are and we know who our children are. Parenting with conviction, this boils down to the why. I will confide in you. Well, it's not really confiding, is it, if I'm sharing it on a public platform, that I was exhausted at the end of the year. And I could feel the niggling burnout spikes poking up at me, right? And I was just hanging out for a holiday. And when I looked at which domain and which area that was in, it was mainly in my professional work. And you know what I wanted to do at that point in time? I wanted to avoid the whole issue, but I knew that to prevent burnout and the progression of burnout, I had to hit the why question. Why are we doing this? Part of the why question is actually asking yourself, what do you see 10 years down the line? What's the picture? And so I find it a really helpful thing to do with children as well. Sitting down and actually having the forward vision of who they are. Who do you see? It's a bit fun, right? It's actually quite a fun exercise. When they're 30 years old, what do you see? What's the picture? So for me, for one of my children, age 30, I probably can see them surrounded by a lot of mess, but happy. Why? Because they also value freedom. When they're 30, they're probably only going to have maybe just a couple of friends, right? Because that's their nature. They are private by nature. They're probably going to be the sort of person that loves to try out different food. They're probably going to be the so on and so on. So what work environment? Probably not a very structured environment, probably one that gives them a lot of autonomy and freedom. What sorts of values are they going to have? They're probably going to be a 30-year-old who champions social justice. I can see this person being a lot part of fundraisers, doing, extreme things. And when I think of the 30-year-old, it helps me then to work backwards to say, well, what's the 13-year-old version of that? Well, no wonder they're driving me nuts with this, right? No wonder they're constantly challenging me, and sort of ridiculing my ideas about what I think is, the constant thing that comes up for us in our household is the school fundraising, right? Like, I have a value to commitment, right, and respect. So when the school says that they're going to fundraise for this thing, I'm like, well, we need to do the right thing. But the child that I just described to you is very cynical about this, wants to know the first principles of this, and why would we want to fundraise for a fancy stage and curtains? Now, that's like a clash of values, but I can see that the 13-year-old version of that person, of the 30-year-old, is trying to figure it out. I can tell you that this same child, when they were a toddler, believed they could fly, right? And believed that they had superpowers, believed that they were here to change the world. That drove me nuts too, because all I wanted them to do was to sit down and eat. No, they had superpowers. They were, it was, never ending. But it helps to know, to have that vision. And I often find it a really helpful thing to return to that vision when I'm frustrated. So parenting with conviction. It's really helpful to also think about what the purpose, the vision of your whole family. So I'll come back to now the vision of the whole family. This may sound a little bit lofty, but it's really a simple thing of this. When we moved into a new neighborhood, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, it was a very multicultural neighborhood. And we realized that from that sense, from that stage of life, our vision really was to be a part of a multicultural community that would learn from one another's cultures and respect one another and be generous in living together. That gave us a purpose. That meant that we now had a mission to basically get to know each of the neighbors, get to know their culture. And come up with a plan. What would that mean for us? Well, it meant that if it was Festival of the Lights, we wanted to go over to their house. If it was Christmas, we wanted to have them over. So having a sense of, what's really valuable and important at this point in time with the season of life that your family is in, what's the vision, what's the purpose, guides us also to know then how we're going to shape some of the behavior of our children. So for example, with our kids, we needed to actually help them to know that different cultures do things differently, what's respectful when you go to someone else's house of a different culture. In fact, thinking through things like foods that were acceptable when acceptable for different cultures. It's also about knowing each other's place. So burnout comes from actually not knowing your role. Right? Not knowing your role and not knowing other people's roles as well. So when you know what your needs are, what your values are, what your strengths are, every person has a strength and a place to be. Right now, I'm revising the kids' chores. We used to do their chores based on developmental age, which was appropriate when they were little. But now that they're really in the adolescent stage, they could do anything, right? They could mow the lawn, they can wash a toilet, they can cook a meal, really, they can do anything. So the developmentally appropriate list is infinite now. Well, not quite infinite. And so what we are doing this year is actually revising their chores based on their strengths and convictions. So the child who is particularly concerned about social justice, what can they do around the house? Well, we do have a sponsor child, and one of the things that we struggle with is actually writing letters to them, for example. So while that's not a chore, it is a responsibility. One of our kids is really interested and has a strength in the arts and in the creativity. And so she actually has a great joy, believe it or not. She loves washing the bathroom because it comes with making it look pretty. Yeah. So knowing each other's place, I really honor you in this role of vacuuming because you have a strength for an eye for detail, or you have a strength for actually looking out for other people's health or struggles, and your vacuuming really makes a difference for dad who has horrible hay fever and sinuses. So knowing each other's place, celebrating each other's strengths. Funny story here. My daughter actually caught me doing a live video when I was talking into the general clinic page about how giving children responsibility actually gives parents ample opportunities to reflect back praise, feedback, and strength. And so she happened to catch me watching the live while I was in the kitchen. And she said to me, "You gave me an idea for how I'm going to deal with my brother." So the two of them share a bathroom, right? And well, you can imagine what that's like. Um, and she said, "I'm going to now give him feedback. Every time I pick up on him doing something great, I'm going to give him that feedback." What does this mean for younger children? Most of the time, you're actually going to be doing this. If you have toddlers and babies, you're going to be doing this in the observation mode of your child, getting to know them, watching, giving them ample opportunities to experiment with a whole bunch of stuff. As they're interacting with children, as they're even helping out around the house with the little things, stacking the Tupperware. Do we even have Tupperware these days? Carrying the towels from the lounge to the linen cupboard. You're watching to actually see some of the characteristics, some of the things that they're drawn to, some of the strengths that they're starting to show, and you can actually start to give them feedback and to utilize that strength. So one of my children from a very young age, we noticed that they're a collector. They're a collector and a categorizer. And that also used to really frustrate me, because that meant messy rooms, there were stones and rocks and all kinds of bugs would come, and I'd be like, okay, they're a collector. But we utilize that strength to basically organize different things, like doing the containers in different sizes and shapes, the family photos as well, that sort of a thing. Next, embracing the seasons. What do I mean by this? We have to remember that our children go through developmental stages. If you're looking for some input in that, the Raising Children's Network is a great resource that organizes children's ages into their stages. In the early years, they're basically learning a lot about you. They're learning about trust relationships. Then they're learning about social relationships. Then they're learning about authority relationships. Then they're learning about social skills, identity formation, hopes, dreams, goals. There are developmental stages. And knowing these things and embracing them just gives us a sense of patience, right? That maybe this is a stage that they're going through, and we don't have to feel like we're failing in the parenting zone. So and equally, that there are parenting stages. As our children are going through the developmental stages, we're going through the parenting stages. So in the early years, our parenting stage is primary caregiver in very practical ways, feeding them, holding them, soothing them, clothing them. When they move into the more social stages, we're actually coaching them. We're giving them skills. We're helping them to know how to play nicely with one another, with other people. When they go into the identity stage, we start to impart values. So our parenting stage also changes to a facilitator. We're facilitating their growth and learning by helping them to identify what their values are and what those behaviors that express those values are. And I like to say that once they get into the later stages of development, we really become the cheerleader. We stand at the sidelines, when they're 16, 17, 18, we're cheerleading them on. They come back to us with their stuff and ask us what we think. If that is the case, we may provide that, but most of the time we're cheerleading them on. And too often I see that parents get really frustrated when they hold on to a particular stage of parenting that their child has actually moved on from. And then knowing your family stages. What stage of family life are you in? You might have maybe sickness in your family. Maybe you have elderly parents. Maybe you have retrenchment there. So what's going on in the family? And really knowing that sometimes there are going to be seasons where we may have to just cut ourselves some slack, cut the kids some slack, because maybe things are just requiring us to slow down or pace down, or do things a little bit differently. Finally, parenting with connection. Once you have confidence, you know who you are, you know who the kids are. Once you have conviction, you know what it's all about, what the strengths are, where you're going, what the purpose, what your family is all about, and where everybody fits into that. Then you can really ease into the connection. You can be flexible with the how, right? You can say, well, maybe we don't have to do it this way. Maybe they don't have to do it this way. So I don't go into the child with a messy room, his room, their room, oops, let it out, much these days, right? Because I accept that their personality will eventually get it, right? Eventually, when they have housemates, when they have to share bathrooms with someone, they will, because there's, you know, they will eventually get it. Okay, so we can be flexible with the how. We can actually step off the accelerator. Sometimes we get a little bit too eager to see our children move through a stage of development faster than really what they're ready for. So what I mean by step off the accelerator, a classic example for me was in my kids' spelling and grammar. I really, really wanted to accelerate that. But when I actually really looked and saw the way that they learned, the stage of development that they were in, I realized that I could step off that accelerator. That's all right. That's not where they need to be, right? That's my stuff. But you also know when to put the brakes, because if some significant family values are being broken, if children are really starting to act out of character and really out of what's appropriate and what's right, and we're less concerned about how other people are viewing us, or whether you're a good parent or a bad parent, but it really comes from that internal knowledge, then we also know when to put the brakes, when to say no, which means we can actually map out the boundaries with a clearer picture. So parenting with connection for me is like watching and watering the garden. I'm not a great gardener, so this is a really poor example, because most things that most plants die in my care, but my children are still alive. There are going to be sunshine times, and you need to know the sunshine times. For children, they will have different energy zones. Younger kids are usually more vibrant and more ready for connection and activity in the earlier part of the day. As they get older, this can vary. I've got one now that the morning is their high connection zone, and I've got another one now where late is their high connection zone. So we've got to actually watch and water and know what the sunshine times are. For some kids, when it's high, exam or assessment time, they don't want to be disturbed. I've got one like that. Do not touch that time. For another, I've got the other one, that's the time they want to play card games and board games and things like that, right? So know your sunshine times, then go water. Are you supposed to water a garden when the sun shines? Maybe not. But anyway, what I mean is that's the time to connect with the sunshine times. Know your stormy times. Know the times when they're tired, when they're just overwhelmed, when they're overstimulated. So for young kids, in general, the afternoon, evening is not a great time. Or for some children, they get really overwhelmed by a lot of sensory input, or with crowds, or that's the time probably, us trying to get into their stuff, and maybe not for all children, try to do the connecting thing may not be what they need right now, right at that point. They may actually need some soothing. They may actually need some quiet time, or some downtime. And I often find that parents might get a little bit guilty that that's when they want to go in and do the stuff, but that may not be the right time for the child. And then I've got the rainy days. The rainy days are the sad days, right? The days where kids aren't feeling so happy, something has happened, or they're frustrated, they're angry. We want to watch for those days as well. You know, it's not always about asking the kids, so what happened? What went wrong? No, we wait and watch and see where are they at? What are the signs that are typical for them that they're not feeling so great? Then we want to know what is the best time and way to connect them, to connect with them. Now, the reason why I put it out this way is because I find a lot of parents get guilty with not only the how of the parenting, but also feeling like they're not connecting with their children well. And what I would like to say into that space is that frequent but high saliency connection points are the thing to go for. So even if you have shorter but hitting the spot where it needs to be by giving them that tuned in attention in the way and in the time that they needed is probably the way to go. A little bit on burnout. Where does parental burnout come from? Well, from guilt. Now, guilt is a really strong emotion because basically when you feel guilt, you believe that you've done something wrong. Parental burnout comes from listening to too many voices, eliciting advice all the time. I see this in Facebook groups for parents. My child has got this rash, and then this picture comes out, and then 60 people will input into what that rash is. And, you know, half of them may be really critical. Why are you asking a dumb question? You should take them to the doctor, type of thing. So in this age of social media, the social referencing has gone haywire. And so we're not just listening to our mother's voice or our mother's group's voice, we're listening to the voice of the collective. We parent from a reactive space. In other words, we ourselves are exhausted, we're not resourced, we don't know, we put ourselves down, and we are just fried up here. And so everything that we're doing is from the little bit that we have left, and it's often emotional and reactive. So we parent from exhaustion. So I want to give you a little bit of insight then into my way of doing burnout prevention as a parent. What are my 6 R's for that? The first R is making time in my day to reflect. These days, there is really 2 spaces. One is the very early, but I have a child who likes to connect in the morning. Remember that? Okay, so that doesn't often work. But I do a little bit, at least 15 to 20 minutes. I like waking up now a little bit earlier than everybody else. I love the smell of coffee, and that's my thing. I love to pad out in my slippers, give the dog a belly rub, that whole thing of switching on, putting the kettle on, and the aroma of the coffee. That's my reflection time, just to have a moment of gratitude and centering. Right. My other reflection time is actually in the car. That's why you'll find me doing a lot of Facebook Lives in the car. I call it transition time. When I come back from work, before I head in the home, I'm not in a rush to go in. I sit in my car. If it's raining, I enjoy the raindrops and I have a mindful moment. I always finish the song that's on the radio, and I sit and I breathe and I just recenter myself and I reflect. That's my rest. I have a couple of ways to rest. If you've ever followed me on my podcasts or my videos, you know that I have different categories of rest. But just as a parent, I will tell you that I have always put in at least 2 to 3 hours where I'm doing practically nothing. When I say nothing, I mean I'm not just a blob. Sometimes I do, sometimes I sleep. I reflect on what's been missing on my week, and sometimes I will sleep for a couple of hours. But most of the time, I actually just go and do things that I enjoy. No responsibility, because freedom is important for me. So at least 2 to 3 hours a week. When my children were younger, I couldn't do 2 or 3 hours a week, but I would at least try to do the once a month rest thing. Replenish, this is a big one. Nourishment. Having an audit to think about what food is missing. A lot of the times we're thinking about what to feed other people, and then we're just eating rubbish. on the side. Tell me if this is you. So actually being mindfully conscious of how much water I'm taking, what are the fruits that I enjoy? Put that first into the shopping trolley. I had this wonderful experience this week of walking in and picking up some blackberries. It was so luxurious. And I was just so grateful carrying my box of blackberries wherever I went because I just felt so nourished, but also so taken care of as I popped each of those berries into my mouth and they exploded. So replenish, watch what you're eating and make sure you put some of the stuff you like into the shopping trolley first. Reconnect. Reconnecting with not only your family, but to the people in your world who actually know you, who love you, who care for you, and whom you get a great sense of joy for. Make sure that they feature prominently and regularly in your diary. Repurpose. Come back to the why. I have a playful nature, and so for me, this is a helpful thing because when I think of my son or my daughter when they're 30, I have a real giggle about what they're going to be. So, coming back to that whole thing of, okay, what is the season that the family is in? It's okay. Let go of the rest of the stuff. Who is this person in front of me what are they going to be like when they're 30, 40, 50, right? Really having that upfront helps me as well to keep things into perspective, have a bit of a laugh, and cut myself some slack. Finally, resourcing. At this point in time in the home life, I keep asking myself two questions. How can we simplify and how can we automate? An example of how can we automate is there a way for me to make my online shopping list as standard as possible? So I basically just go click and it goes on to the shopping list, right? An example of simplifying is we are moving into a much bigger house at the moment. And there's an upstairs and there's a downstairs. And right now we've had a dog for the last, I don't know, 5 years, who's very cute. The way that he goes to the toilet is he rings a bell and we have to open the door and let him out, right? Which hasn't been too much of an issue when we've lived in a much smaller house and we're always around to open the door, right? But I can tell you this, when we get to the bigger house and there's an upstairs and a downstairs, there's going to be a whole bunch of yelling when the dog rings the bell. And then what's going to happen? I'm going to let the dog out. And you know what's going to happen? I'm going to worry about the dog not getting to the toilet. Then I am going to sit by the side of the dog. I can see this happening. So simplify, install a dog door in the new house. That's one of our strategies going forward. So those are my 6 R's and how I then try to stay afloat in the parenting space. Which really brings me to all that I wanted to say. And I'm just looking to see if we have any comments. I'll just go back into the Facebook page and see. Please feel free. That's all I had to say. I will be finishing off very soon if I don't hear anything back from anybody. No? Well, even if when I stop, feel free to send me a message and let me know. What did you think? How did it go? Is it the same for you? Is it different for you? Do you have any ideas to add? All right, everybody, I'm going to say farewell.